Hello and welcome to my first video tutorial where I'm going to talk you through how I painted Darius the Blue from Reaper Miniatures in a speed paint style. It took me about an hour and a half. Without further ado, let's get into it. So starting off, we have a grey primer, and we're going to start with anthracite grey, and this is mostly going to be used for the outer cloak, so the sort of the back, the cape, the arms. We're just going to go through now and do a solid base coat of this. You're kind of looking for the consistency of the paint to be around about skimmed milk is what everyone always says. So you don't need a lot of water to get it to that consistency. Just a sort of a wet brush and then mix it in just until you find the consistency you like. You should always aim to try and do thin coats and lots of them to get the colour you want, rather than slapping loads of paint on to start with, because you will lose details. Just going to make sure that we cover the hat as well. And what I do actually do is, I forget to do it on this step, but the under robe as well, we will just cover with that. Next we are going to use Indian Shadow from scale colour 75, and this is going to be for the inside of the robe, the brim of the hat. This is a darker reddy brown almost, and this is going to go grey as an opposing colour to that blue. So same again, just make sure you get nice even coverage of this. We will come back to this a couple of times after it's dried. Always make sure that the underlayer has dried properly until you do the second layer, otherwise you can drag the paint underneath off as you apply the second coat. So it's all just about taking your time, being careful. The neater you are now, the less tidy up you have to do afterwards, so there will be a few points in the video where I do come back afterwards and I'll neaten up where the different colours touch, etc., things like that. But the neater you are now, the more time you take on doing these layers, the less of that you will have to do afterwards. It's a great sort of routine to get into, to just always try and paint as neatly as possible. So we will add some of this red to the rim of the hat as well. I do go over a little bit here, but we just come back in with that blue and tidy it up again afterwards. And you can see the inner robe next to the red I haven't base coated. We do hit the blue with another colour, so I've skipped that step on the inside. However, when you're using the blue to start with, you will want to base coat that and make sure that that's also covered, just to save yourself a little bit of time. Next up we have white sands from a scale 75, and now this is going to be for the body of the mouse sitting on the book. We'll also base coat the beard with this as well. Whites will always take more to cover. Usually I would work up from greys to work my way through up to it. However, because this is a bit more of a speed paint, we are just going to use some slightly thinner layers and cover it as we go. So the eyebrows, the beard are all going to get base coated with this colour, and it's incredibly important to make sure that this is dry before you do a second coat, because this is one of the colours that you will notice it more on. So we're just going to wait until that's dry and then hit it again. We're also going to use some of that Indian skin tone red that we had before just to hit the tail, the ears and the nose of the mouse, just as a base coat. These won't be the final colours, but it's adding pre-shading almost. The next step is to come in with a basic skin flesh tone as our base for the skin. I've chosen to use basic flesh from the scale 75. Buckman's Glow from Games Workshop works fine for this as well. Whatever you feel comfortable with. And we're just looking to get a nice solid coat on the hands and bits of the face. Again, looking to avoid losing any detail. So thin coats, working your way up to a solid colour. Next up we have Bering Blue, again from scale 75. You'll see a pattern here. I like this colour and this range a lot. We're now going to do the inside of this cloak, this colour, and we're also going to go back over the rest of the cloak with this as well. As I say, the previous blue, the anthracite grey, was the base coat. We did forget on the inside robes, however I had already recorded it by the time I remembered, so it just goes to show that there are mistakes in everything. It's always a good thing to learn from. Plan things out accordingly. But yeah, so we are just going to use this to cover those inside robes, and then we are going to cover over the outside of the darker areas of the robe as well. So just bring it to a nicer blue. We will leave the darkest bits on the back of the robe in the recesses. So what I tend to do when I do this and do highlights is I tend to water down the paint a little bit further, just to make it that little bit more translucent to help when you blend your shading. So you can see we've given this a few coats now, it's starting to come out in that nice blue colour. The more coats you do, the more opaque the colour will get. It's a nice thing to build the opacity more towards the highlight of the area. So the darker base colour is showing through more in the shadowed recess. Zandri dust from Games Workshop, although any other cloth or bone coloured colour will do. This will be for the underrobe and also the pages of the magical tome in Darius's hand. So it's important with this one to use thin coats again. Anything that's more closer to white is harder to cover, which was one of the main reasons that we chose grey as the primer for this model. It's a nice middle ground for us to go off of. Black might be a little bit too hard to cover, so grey gives us that nice middle ground that we can work from. So again, just take your time, make sure that you fully cover each area, getting decent coverage. And then we will also hit the pages of the book just to supply them with a bit of a base coat as well. Now we're going to come back with that red that we used at the start. We're just going to give everything another coat. So the sash, the cuff of the hood, and the inside of the robes. Just making sure that everything is fully covered and focusing it more towards the edges to give the look of a highlight. Now, thinning that same red coat a lot further, so it's almost like a glaze, it's quite watery at this point, we're going to wick away a lot of the moisture on a small paper towel, and then we're going to use it to add some shadow to the skin. So anywhere where there is a recess, so sort of in between the fingers on the hand, the palms of the hand, around the wrist, the cheekbones, the eye sockets, and anywhere on the mouse's tail, we're all going to cover with this very watered down mix, and this is going to just give a bit of shade, a bit of depth to the skin. We're also going to go in and give the mouse another coating of the white here, very thin down that you can see. Something that just doing very, very slowly over time just to build up. You don't want to rush in with the colour and slap it down, because you will just have a chalky mouse on there where you can't see all of those lovely details. And because it is so small, it is important to preserve those, or the effect will be lost. Now we're going to take some abyssal blue and really thin it down, and we're going to use this to paint in shadows on the robes. So anywhere where there's a recess, we're going to use a very, very thin coat of this. The more layers you do, the more you can build up the effect. So inside the wizard's sleeve, you will notice that we apply quite a few layers throughout the video as we slowly apply it more and more to the centre to intensify that shadow. We're also going to use this on the robe in between the folds just to do some very, very light extra shading. We'll add this in the hair as well, just to help separate the texture in the hair a little bit more. Moving on to the leather of the book, we're going to use blood red from scale 75. Corn red is a good exchange for this, very similar colours. And we are just going to do some thin coats of this to build it up. Apologies for the painting off camera on this bit. I'm still getting used to painting to show other people than more so for myself. So we are building this colour up. You can see some thin coats of it. Just being careful not to overlap any of that white on the hands or anywhere like that. Make sure you get the edges of the book as well where it overlaps. We're also going to thin this down and add a little bit of this into the areas just outside the shading on the skin, just to give a little bit of colour to the skin as well. So we're working our way through now, everything's starting to come together a little bit better. We're now going to add just a drop of white to our bearing blue. We're going to start highlighting up the raised edges of the cloak, just to give the effect of light hitting them, avoiding the recesses so that we keep that lovely shade that we've added with the abyssal black watered down. Again, this is very thin, just to keep that effect. On the fingers, for instance, the fingertips, the tip of the nose and the cheekbones are all things that we'll just add a little bit of light to here. And now, using a very small amount of that abyssal black, we are going to add some eyes to our mouse friend. And we are going to thin some down and add it to the wizard's eyes, just to add some shading underneath. The consistency of this is really up to you. I find sometimes it works better a little bit thicker than a usual thin layer, but other times it's better to have it thinner. So play around with it, see what you enjoy the most. I also used this mixture to write some scribbles on the pages of the book later on, and again that's another time when consistency is something you'll want to play with. Also, for those of you that think that I might be being beamed up by aliens at this point, I am trying a head torch that I recently acquired, along with some magnifying lenses, and other than making me look a little bit silly, it hasn't done a great amount for me. Base coat it and really bring it up to a point that we're happy with. I'm going to use some shabby bone now, watered down. This is going to be to highlight the cloth and the pages of the book. So we don't want to cover the entire thing, we just want the edges of the cloth, as you can see. Doing a bit of an edge highlight on some bits, hitting some of the recesses, You want to hit the edges of the pages and just a little bit down the centre of the book as well, just to show light reflecting it. Coming up to the end now, we're going to use a very watered down coat of Arctic Blue from scale 75. This is a sort of a grey blue, so you could always just add a little bit of your light blue to a grey to achieve this. Very watered down because it's going to be the highest highlight. We do just want it to be very transparent. We don't want it to be too strong. You can hit all the edges of the cloak with this and any recesses that are in the way. Then we're going to move on to giving the coat and the book, another base coat, just to make sure that that colour is nice and solid. Using a bit of our abyssal black watered down, we're going to add some shadow to the beard and some banding in the hair. Now for a final coat of Arctic Blue, watered down again, just hitting those highlights in the most extreme areas just to strengthen them. Don't forget to do the tip of the hat as well, as this is something that's going to hit the light. And with that we are getting towards the end now. It is starting to all come together. Finished product, Darius the Blue from Reaper Miniatures. I hope you've enjoyed the video. It is my first, so I'm sure there will be a plethora of issues with it. If you've got any feedback or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Drop a sub if that's something that you'd feel comfortable doing, and hopefully I'll be back again with another tutorial with improved quality of something else. Take care everyone, be excellent to each other.